Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We're here today, Rod Taylor, CHP leader, and myself, to talk about a couple of things, media bias in relation to a couple of stories, and the Conservative leadership race and the UN Security Council seat bid.
Wow.
And before we do that, though, we want to talk about one CHP policy that would have saved our country a little bit of embarrassment, a little bit of trouble. It was reported just earlier this week that China had rejected some logs, wooden logs, trees that were cut down, that were sent over there because there were invasive bugs, beetles in those logs, and so they rejected them and sent them back, and rightly so. They don't want to have those invasive bugs over there destroying their trees. And so how would CHP's policy have saved us this embarrassment?
Well, of course, we think that logs cut in Canada should be processed in Canada by Canadian workers and do the value-added process here, not in general. And my hat's off to all those who are in the logging industry. Some people are working now because they're able to ship logs overseas, and this is no slight on them. But as a policy for the country, generally, our resources should be processed here. And that goes for oil, that goes for water, that goes for wood products. Anything that we can do to raise value here and keep jobs in Canada should be done. So when we ship raw logs to China or Japan or anywhere else, and workers over there turn them into usable products, then we're missing out on the value-added portion. This that you've referenced, Peter, is kind of different because there's been a failure on our part here. I'm not quite sure what the process is for raw logs, but one of the benefits of doing the sawing and milling of lumber in our country is that we can process the final product usually through heat treating or kiln drying, and that kills the bugs. When I worked in the lumber industry here at Kiowa Forest Products at Morristown, close by here, we had a process, and even the little pieces of lumber that are underneath a load of lumber that are used to strap it on, it's called dunnage. And we had to stamp that it had been heat treated or kiln dried. And there was an official stamp. We worked with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they actually came and inspected our product, made sure that the stamp was legible, made sure that we were following the procedures, so that even that little piece of wood that's under a load of lumber was free of pests. So there's a benefit to everyone following the rules. We're following a lot of rules now with COVID-19 to try to keep from sending a pestilent virus to somebody else. And of course, Canada has a responsibility not to be shipping our invasive pests to other countries. So anyway, it's an interesting story. And it's also interesting that China now is finding various ways to embarrass countries with whom she disagrees. And I think, some of these things are a result of the capture of Ming Wanzhou and the Huawei thing. That, there's certainly been a backlash from that on China's part. But anyway, we think our policies are the best policies to keep the jobs in Canada, and then we can better control any invasive pests that might be hiding in the lumber.
So again, that's a policy of keeping jobs in Canada, value added in Canada. And for more policies that are common sense like this, go to chp.ca. And if you're not a member, you can also become a member there. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can also make a donation there, chp.ca. Hope that you'll check that out. So getting on to the main stories that we want to cover today, the first was the UN Security Council bid. Canada, and especially the Trudeau government, had been trying to get that seat for more than 4 years, I believe. They'd been really campaigning for it. Apparently, Trudeau had spent many hours and many taxpayer dollars on it. And yesterday we found out that he didn't get it. He didn't even come close. He wasn't even second. He was a distant, distant third. So you would think that the headlines today would be, embarrassing loss for Trudeau, embarrassing loss for the Liberals, but it was a more bland, Canada loses out on the Security Council seat. It's true, that headline is true, but it doesn't really do justice to what would have been the headline if there had been a triumph. If the Liberals had been able to get that seat, it would have been, much louder. Trudeau triumphs, you can just imagine it.
Yeah.
That's just the way the media is these days. So just think about that. And when you're reading headlines, these things are sometimes the bias that you don't read. It's just what they don't state.
Of course, the media did
but there's a lot more to it, of course, than that. So in terms of the UN security seat, it's a big loss for us, yes or no? What do you think?
Well, first of all, back up on the media bias side of things. The media did bash Mr. Harper when he similarly failed to win a seat, or when Canada was not awarded a seat on Security Council. And at that time, the media acted like, of course, it's because of Mr. Harper's, terrible position on various issues. And I'm not sure what their spin is on it now. The important thing that I recall, going back to January and February, when Mr. Trudeau was, kind of parading around in Africa and various places around the world, trying to win favor to win this seat. He's been at this for a while. This was something he really wanted to achieve. While he was over there, our country, sort of the Nero fiddling while Rome burns thing, we had rail blockades going on here that were paralyzing Canada's economy, and COVID was just starting to become a thing at that time. There was news about it. It wasn't really clear what was going to happen with COVID, but all that time, Mr. Trudeau was over across the seas, speaking with foreign dignitaries and trying to win this seat, which, of course, he did not win. By the time he came home, the rail blockades had been going on for so long, and he basically, in desperate measures, cut deals without thinking them through. And we're going to all have to live with the consequences of that. But had he been home and meeting with the people who were concerned, and maybe actually enforcing the law as it should have been enforced, we wouldn't be where we are today. So anyway, the UN,
and Harper actually, just back to the point on Harper for a second, Harper actually got more votes than Trudeau. He may have campaigned to the same extent, but it wasn't a headline that he was doing it. So for all that,
So, some people call this a vanity project for our prime minister. And in some ways, the UN itself is a vanity project. There's a lot of things going on there, and a lot of issues. Canada, our representation there through our ambassador has been often an embarrassment to us who are social conservatives, because Canada has been pushing things like abortion around the world, even in countries where it's illegal. Canada's representatives, we are kind of leading the charge on things like gender confusion and enforcing things that many of us think are bad ideas. And then Canada also seems to want to go along with, if it comes out of the UN, we're supposed to bow down to it and say, oh, that's great, represents the feelings of the world. But, these ambassadors who have a vote from many countries, including many countries where slavery is still practiced and where other human rights violations are going on, why should Canada bow the knee to those things? So what are your thoughts, Peter, about the UN?
Well, as you were saying, some of the countries that are there's a certain number of permanent seats on this Security Council, where Canada was trying to get a temporary seat, and one of the countries that has the permanent seat is China. And So it's a yeah, it's a veneer. I mean, it's good to have it's better, it's supposed to have a veneer of civility than to have outright hostility, but it's really an interesting dynamic when you have, the United States and China, who are not necessarily on great terms, both on that same council. You do wonder if it will even be an effective organization at a certain point.
Well, there's a few points there about, China not only has a seat on the Security Council, but even on the UN Human Rights Council. And when you think of how China treats its own people, the persecution of the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, Christians right now, there's churches being torn down. There's Bible-believing people being taken off to jail for assembling, not because of COVID, but because of their faith. And organ harvesting from political prisoners. I mean, there's so much wrong with China's human rights record, and yet China is sitting on the UN Human Rights Council. So, any decisions coming out of that council, you'd have to really question whether they're valid, or whether Canada should even be paying any attention. Whether Canada should even maintain any presence at the UN is a big question to me, because if you're a member of an organization and it's going every way that you don't want to go, why stay with it? Of course, the UN is pretty much in lockstep with Mr. Trudeau's vision for Canada, so I see why he stays with it. But I think the rest of us, ordinary common sense people, should really be questioning Canada's continuing role in the UN at all.
Wow. Okay. So another thing that happened in Parliament yesterday, and I'll just segue with this to a major topic, is that the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, was actually forced out of Parliament for the remainder of the session because he had called one of the Bloc Québécois MPs racist. And so that was not considered acceptable. And so he was told to leave. And it's an odd story. He really saw the Blocs, the Blocs actually blocked a unanimous consent motion on the RCMP. So that was the thing that started it. But he's actually one of the he's not the first. He's not the only minority Sikh member in Parliament. There's actually quite a few. There have been over time, but he's the first leader of a party in Parliament to be Sikh, as far as I know. Pretty sure about that, actually. Anyway, so he called someone else racist, but then he was, told that he had that was disorderly and unacceptable, and so he had to leave the chamber. But it seems as though he was just really sad by the direction things had gone, and aggravated by them. Did you actually want to add something to that, Rod, in particular?
The point is, often with the NDP and the left, I suppose it's a general trend in our society today, but when you don't agree with someone, you call them a name. And when I was young, my parents kind of discouraged that approach to life. And at the Parliament, we would think that our elected representatives would use the opportunity to debate the issues, but to say, and the reason he called him a racist is because he didn't vote for, the motion. And I think, why do we send our elected representatives? They are to have a vote and a voice. So I think to turn around and just call someone a racist, it wasn't a racist act or racist words that the man uttered. He just didn't fall in line with what Jagmeet Singh thought he should do. And so he threw those words out. And I thought it was unusual that they asked him to leave the house for the day. It's sort of like telling someone to go stand in the corner until they, get their act together. So hopefully some semblance of civility will carry on here. But it's part of the whole part and parcel of what's going on with the Black Lives Matter and all that stuff going on, that everyone is supposed to get in the same boat and sing the same tune. And people who have a nuanced view of it or want to discuss certain aspects of it are the tendency is just call them racists and discount their opinions entirely, and that's certainly not fair. So I think it was, kind of interesting that happened to Jagmeet Singh.
So we'll have to be careful then in the next topic that we're not going to accuse anyone of racism, but instead point out an inconsistency. The Conservative Party had its first leadership debate last night. They've got 4 contenders that are still left, and one of them is Leslyn Lewis, and she's born in Jamaica. She's a visible minority, and she is the kind of a voice, as the media likes to say, that should be someone that everyone is listening to. If I can just hear Trudeau, if it was one of his members of parliament that was of that background, of her education, he would be trumpeting, these are the voices we need to listen to, right? But as the case is, she's received some media attention, but rightly so. She's running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, and so all of them should have some coverage, but she's a minority, and she is interviewed by the CBC, but she complained about it afterwards because they cut out the part where she criticized Trudeau, and they didn't want to show that particular part. So her voice matters, her opinion matters, except when she criticizes Trudeau.
Wow.
So that's not racism, it's biological. It's bigotry in terms of ideology. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, and we didn't mention, it was the French language debate last night. The English language debate is tonight. But the 2 social conservatives, Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan, were quite clear, and it's fair to say that none of the candidates are 100% fluent. It's not their native language, French. Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan probably were at the most disadvantage because both of them have only really begun practicing and learning their French skills within the last year. So hats off to them. They did, I thought, a credible job. They got through the debates and were able to make some of their points. They didn't get the time that O'Toole and McKay got. Every time they opened it for a 5-minute, open session, Mr. McKay and Mr. O'Toole went at each other hammer and tongs, accusing each other mostly of not being far enough to the left. One would accuse the other, oh, you didn't support LGBTQ rights, and the other one, oh, I sure did, and you didn't, and it was back and forth. It was kind of embarrassing, I thought, embarrassing exchange. But aside from the kind of evident hostility of the situation, and each one saying, I'm the one, and to only one that can lead the party and whatever, they left out Dr. Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan significantly, like the 2 who have considered themselves the front runners. Leslyn Lewis did challenge that assumption, and I think fairly so. Just because someone thinks that they should be in front doesn't mean that they are in front. And voters in the Conservative Party are going to have plenty of time to look at this. But Derek Sloan made a lot of bold statements. I mean, he came right out of the gate talking about abortion and gender issues, freedom of speech, debt and deficit. He talked on a lot of issues. His concerns about WHO and Theresa Tam. There's no hidden agenda there. He's talking about what he believes. And Leslyn Lewis she was very clear that the family is the centerpiece of society and of our, culture, and that she was there to defend the family. So we appreciate them. The other two, I'm just going to say, for those who are involved, we're in the Christian Heritage Party where we all agree on some of these issues. But for those that are still trying to do something within the Conservative Party, it's crystal clear. Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay have declared themselves pro-abortion and, pro every aspect of LGBTQ expansion. So, the choices are pretty clear there for those involved in that, who will be voting in that race.
Yep, I suppose if one of the social conservatives wins and Peter MacKay or Aaron O'Toole feel out of place, there's lots of room for them in the Liberal Party in terms of their overall morality. They'll fit right in terms of their stand on abortion. That's really the sad truth.
Yeah, they're not far off of the Liberal agenda on the social issues. That's for sure.
Yeah. On a few other issues, they're marginally better, but those main issues, life and death, they're very disappointing. And the way that they're fighting each other really should make you question their integrity. The two others, the friends of life, are not at each other's throats, and I think that's a credit to them. I will encourage them, if they're watching, to keep that up, be a credit to each other, and show that politics can be done in a civil and responsible way.
Yeah, I didn't see either of the two, Derek or Leslin, taking any cheap shots at any of the candidates, including the two Red Tories. They just basically said, well, I'm here representing my values. They were even asked, who would you want people to put as a second choice? And, they both declined to say that. They just said, well, our members can make that decision. I'm here representing, my point of view. And so I thought they handled themselves reasonably well, certainly under the awkwardness of not being fluent in French. And tonight they will have a better opportunity, I think, to get their ideas out to the public.
Well, that's so hopefully that informs you. If you're watching and you're a Conservative Party member, hopefully that will be of some help, that brief analysis, and there may be more to come in the months ahead, but it's a start. And Rod, you just wanted to make, I think, one last point on a Supreme Court decision in the U.S.
Yes.
And then we'll wrap it up.
Thanks. Across the border, we always watch what's going on in the U.S. as well as in Canada, where we are closely related, not only geographically, but we function in a similar type of democratic process. And we have a similar kind of cultural war going on in each country, And so in the United States, the Supreme Court made a very unfortunate decision Monday, and they basically redefined the word sex from the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It was, I thought, quite unfortunate, and especially it was disappointing because the justice who wrote the decision, and for the majority, was Justice Neil Gorsuch, who was one of Trump's appointees and one that people felt was going to stick with constitutional principles. And in this case, we've seen this happen so often in Canada and in the U.S., where the court has taken upon itself to redefine, and in a way they're legislating from the bench. They're making laws that the rest of the country is basically going to have to live with. And by saying that the word sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act referred also to sexual orientation, transgenderism, and so on, first of all, I think it's dishonest. As some have pointed out, in 1964, very few people knew even what the word transgender meant, and it was not included in any way, shape, or form. And so by doing that, they've basically made it so that an employer cannot have any discretion regarding a hiring or firing of an individual based on gender identity, sexual orientation. And in many cases, if this is, working on a railroad or piling lumber, as I did many years, then, certainly that it makes sense. But in a sensitive position, a Christian organization wanting to function according to Christian principles, and to have someone suddenly, one of your staff members begin to manifest, a man dressing as a woman and so on, where it affects what you're doing. It impacts your ability to function as a Christian organization. But they've been denied that. And there are more cases coming, but this one has kind of set the table. There is a lot of concern whether churches will be able to insist on hiring, Christians for their activities. And of course, it has implications for the sports industry as well, both amateur and professional sports, where men who claim to be women are now winning a lot of the contests, winning titles and, even scholarships to universities and so on. And because they're claiming to be a woman and they're competing against actual women, biological women and girls who have a smaller, smaller bone structure and, less muscle mass and all that. So it raises a lot of questions. And again, it's a disappointment that someone you thought was going to stand up for constitutional principles has gone the other way. So we'll see what kind of implications that has for Canada.
Well, these Supreme Court decisions from other countries do tend to affect one another, especially among countries such as Canada, US, and Australia, Great Britain. These sorts of things, these courts look at each other and they seem to reference each other, even though it's not really, there's not a good precedent for that. They do. So it may have implications for Canada, so we can't turn a blind eye to it. Well, again, thanks for watching, all of you. Thanks, Rod, for your thoughts on all these issues. Bit of a grab bag today, but we hope to see you again next week for another edition of CHP Talks.
Thanks, Peter, and God bless you all.